Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Today, we have a very special guest, David Cote. David Cote is the best-selling author of Winning Now, Winning Later, and the former chairman and CEO of Honeywell. Today, he's the executive chairman of Veritiv Holdings. While at Honeywell, David grew the company from $20 billion market cap to $120 billion with a total share owner return of about 800%, beating the S&P 500 by 2.5 times. David's thought leadership on how to succeed today while also planning for the future has never been more relevant for those of you in contact centers and customer experience. We have to be able to hold these two ideas in our minds as leaders at the same time, and David shows you how to do that. Please enjoy David Cote. David, welcome to the Modern Customer, all the way from Atlanta. How's the weather out in Atlanta today?
Actually, it's pretty nice. You're getting that time of year when temperatures start to go down a bit, so it gets quite comfortable in Atlanta.
Seems like you've lived all over, though, because you don't have a Georgia accent. Where are you originally from?
Oh, New Hampshire. Yeah, I tend to have much more of a New Hampshire accent than anything else.
Well,
You can
David,
usually tell it if I talk about something's really hard to do, or we got to jump in the car to go somewhere. That's when it comes up.
I would have thought Boston.
Yeah, 60 miles north of Boston.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, amazing. Well, thank you for being here. I found your book because I was researching on the idea of strategy and on metrics. And I just am curious, what inspired you to write the book? Why put all these thoughts down on paper after having so much success?
Uh, well, kind of funny, I guess, because my wife always used to encourage me to write a book, and I would tell her, "Nah, no, nobody's going to be interested in what I got to say. I'm not going to do it." But then I got uh, input from two very different sources. One was Hank Paulson, who said, "Hey, you really need to write a book about your experience," and the other was Barack Obama, because I was talking to him one day. We were talking about leadership, and I was telling him the kind of things that I looked for and thought about as a leader. And he said, that's the sort of stuff that would have been really helpful to me when I first took the job, because I had to learn all that stuff on the job. And you really ought to write a book about that. And I thought, well, geez, if those two folks are saying it, and of course my wife says, yeah, it wasn't enough when I said it. And I said, well, maybe not, but I thought it was worth trying to do. So I put a lot of attention into writing it, and then found out that what I'd written wasn't quite good enough as far as a sales agent was concerned. And I finally got myself a ghostwriter, and they both said, content's terrific, but needs to be packaged a lot differently because it's a memoir and you're not famous enough. And I said, well, I never tried to be famous, but it's about what I did at Honeywell, not about what I did in the sixth grade. And they said, no, that's still a memoir. So you need 10 lessons for. And that's how we ended up with it.
Well, the book is extremely relevant, and it's extremely relevant because it's about short termism and how you can achieve both success now while also planning for the future. Why are people so bad at planning for the future? And if there's ever an example of that for me, it's COVID, because we just were not prepared to deal with this thing out of left field. So, why is it just so hard?
Well, it's funny you say that because COVID is one of my pet examples. Because if we were smart as a country, right now we would say, okay, we just went through this debacle. Most people would say it wasn't handled as well as it could have been. So, what did we learn from this? And what will we do next time? And that includes determining whether it's air or water. Is it, do we have the right kind of consumables set up wherever they might be needed? Do we look at the statistics from other areas first, like we should have done with Italy before deciding to send everybody home and putting our kids behind in school for a year and a half, and nobody's doing anything. We're on to the next short term item. So, why is it so difficult to your question? Because even with this recent experience, we're not looking longer term to say, okay, what can we learn from all this? Um, the reason is because it's hard to do. And what makes it hard is the way I talk about it is success comes from achieving two seemingly conflicting things at the same time.
Yeah.
And as you start to look at business or life, you find out that it's always true. But people want to know, what's the one thing, boss, you want me to work on? Well, the reality is it's always two seemingly conflicting things. And, if you want some simple examples, do you want low inventory or do you want great customer delivery? Do you want great margins and prices or do you want big volumes? Do you want decisions made closest to the action and rapidly, or do you want to have good control so nothing bad happens? Do you want to hire people quickly, or do you want to have the best people? Do you want things right, or do you want them fast? It's always true. But the only way you do that is if you say, okay, so what's the root cause that helps me figure out how do I achieve both? And that's when it gets difficult and people don't want to do it because it really is hard to do. But if you can figure it out and say, okay, what's that thing that I have to focus on that allows me to accomplish both, then you can really get somewhere. And I really do think great leaders find a way to do that.
So David, I we were talking before the show started that my audience, they are largely customer experience professionals, people that run contact centers and customer service. Customer experience and customer service are in a very difficult inflection point right now because customer expectations have exploded. At the same time, the contact center where customer service lives is largely seen as a cost center. There's some amazing stories in your book about customer experience and the work you did at Honeywell. Why do you think that most companies are missing the mark on customer experience from a leadership perspective, from the people like you at the very top of the organization?
Yeah, I oftentimes think that the problem is they end up believing the reports they get or believe what they hear in their staff meetings. And if they could actually just go out and talk to some of the customers themselves, talk to some of the people that they have answering the phones for them, do a skip level meeting with them to say, what are you hearing from customers? What pisses them off? What should we be doing about it? And get a lot more of that kind of direct feedback. That makes a heck of a difference. And you can't just trust the reports or the consultants analysis that's done about what's important to customers. And I can say, having been on the receiving end many times of trying to reach a company when you have a problem, they sure could use a lot of work there.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of great stories in your book. One of them details an experience you had in a meeting in Arizona with someone who was supposed to be or wanted to be CEO, and then you were made CEO. And basically in the meeting you're not willing to tolerate any nonsense and politeness and bureaucracy, which is something that can get in the way. Can you remember that moment? Can you recount that story for our audience?
Well, there's several stories associated with that business. Yeah, that one, I can remember being with the leader at the business at the time, and you're correct, he'd been a candidate for my job and didn't get it. Uh, and their frustration was that when they would give me a presentation, that I wouldn't just sit there and listen to the whole 50 pages and then ask my questions. And I kept interrupting, and they'd say something. And for example, uh, here's our strategic advantages. And they would expect me to just accept it, and then we'd move on to the next page. Whereas I would start with, okay, well, why is that first one a strategic advantage? Why are we better than our competitors in this? And I'd kind of go through each of those. And it really bothered him. And he said, we go through a lot of work to create a presentation. And I said, well, uh, I guess we have to decide what the point of the meeting is. If it's for me to watch you put on a show, well, we can be done a lot faster. But I view this as an opportunity for me to learn about your business and to understand it and hopefully make it better. And if that's the case, then we ought to conduct the meeting in a way that allows me to learn the best. And I learn the best by kind of grounding some of the assumptions up front and making sure we all agree. We never did agree on all that. That leader eventually left, as you might probably already imagine. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to learn about your business and have interactions with your staff that allow you to both be very candid with each other about what you're seeing, what's going on, and how you're going to make things better.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the problems in the world in business and customer experience and beyond are because people don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. Seems like a trend in your book. People don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to do the
Yeah,
hard things.
you could not be more right about that. It's one of the things I find most frustrating is people just not being candid about what they actually think. And in general, I don't care if what they think disagrees with what I think. And early on, I came to the conclusion that I was going to be measured on whether I made good decisions, not on whether I was right from the beginning. And it was more important to me to make sure that I made a good decision. And if you approach life that way as a leader, no matter what function you're leading, it allows you to gather a lot more facts, opinions, kind of do the to and fro to figure out, okay, what are the facts here? What are the things that we need to think about? How do we make sure that we make the best and right decision? And if you do it that way, well, you find candor comes a lot more easily to you. But you also see it in appraisals. It's really surprising how people don't want to, managers in particular, do not want to be candid on an appraisal and tell an employee, um, hey, you're good at these things, but you could actually do better over here. And
Yeah.
they think they're being kind to the employee. What really they're doing is being a coward because
Yeah.
that employee thinks they're going to have great career growth. And if all of a sudden their career is not growing like it should, and it's because they've got this thing they haven't worked on because nobody has told them about it because their manager is a coward, how is that being kind? It makes
Right.
no sense. It's the same thing with if you have somebody who's a poor performer, and let's say uh, he or she's got 10 people working for them. Well, the manager above them looks at us, oh, geez, I got to make sure that I'm kind and gentle with this employee. Oftentimes, the HR people want to weigh in and say, okay, you need to guide them a bit, you need to help them. And nobody thinks about those 10 poor schlubs who work for that person who's doing a poor job. And
Right.
the lives of those 10 are very uncomfortable working for somebody who's not performing well. And it's like that one over one manager focuses on how they feel about something and their discomfort. They worry about the discomfort of the person they're going to have to talk with. And nobody thinks about those 10 poor schlubs who have to work for them.
Yeah. So, as a leader's CEO, it seems like one thing you could have done, or you probably did, was model and reward behavior for people that are willing to be honest to your face and not get angry at them. Because I think people are scared as well. Like, I can't disrespect the CEO. I can't challenge them, but seems like some of the more modern CEOs, they like that. They welcome it and they don't want to be seen as the king in the castle.
Well, I would say not every employee wants to speak up. And it's important to recognize that because you got a lot of employees who much prefer having the excuse of, I'm afraid, I don't know what'll happen, you can't speak up in this company. It makes it more comfortable for them because then they don't have to. They've got an excuse. And it's not because they're a coward, it's because they'll get fired. Uh, which most of the time, I can say, because in Honeywell, we got that even after 16 years and you'd run into employees and say, well, I'm afraid to speak up. And I'd tell them, well, if you haven't learned by this stage of your life and working with Honeywell, then you're never going to. So stop using that as an excuse. And the people that I want to see succeed here are the ones who are willing to speak up. And I could usually point to them and say, name one person who has ever been let go or whose career has been impacted because they spoke up in a meeting with me. Not one.
Right. Right.
But it's important to recognize, especially as a leader, you're never going to stamp out all of that. I'm afraid to speak up, because there are some people who prefer to be afraid to speak up because it's easier for them. But if you can get that, I don't know, 70% of people who are willing to speak up, well, then you got something. And I found even how you ran a meeting. So I did a lot of town halls, and trying to get in a town hall of 200 or 1,000 people, trying to get people to speak up can be a problem. You say any questions, you do your little spiel and then say any questions, and you usually find total silence. So I would always preface it with, it always takes one brave soul willing to be the one who's willing to speak up
That
and
always
start the
works.
ball rolling. Yeah, so who is that brave soul? And there's like 10 people in the audience itching to be that one. And finally, one of them just can't resist and raises their hand. And then it begins. And once the ball starts rolling, then it gets really easy for everybody else.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and talk about winning now and winning later. I was so excited about your book because it's not written for a customer experience professional, but I really felt like it would be so relevant for people that run customer experience or service. And so you wanted to move Honeywell, a company that was struggling a bit, to a different model. And so you had a very simple strategy to focus on both short-term profits, which you knew you had to turn around because your reputation was on the line, as well
Yeah.
as the future and long term. And you did three things. So I want to hear about these three things, and I'll just list them off because they're right in front of me. Like, how would you do this for customer service or customer experience? And number one is scrub accounting and business practices down to what is real. Number two, invest in the future, but not excessively. Number three is grow while keeping fixed costs constant. Can you imagine that for
Yeah.
customer service?
Um, if I was running a customer service operation, I'd probably look at it a little differently. This works well for looking at a total business, whether you've got 10 people in a business or 1,000. If I was running a customer service operation, I think the way I would take the same kind of approach, but have three different items. Um, I'd start first with truly understanding what the customer values, and not what the sales guy says the customer values or what the CEO says or what a consultant's report says, but actually go visit a bunch of customers and just ask them, or talk to a bunch of consumers. If you've got consumers on the phone and who've had a recent experience, do a random call for 50 of them with a standard questionnaire and just ask them what did they like, what did they not like about the whole thing. So figure out from that, okay, what is the customer value? Second step would be, okay, now develop metrics that correspond to something that the customer values. And getting back to a point that you made earlier, uh, make sure you pick metrics that, number one, truly can be measured, and two, they're robust. Because, as I'm fond of saying, if you measure something, the metric will get better because people learn how to manage the metric. So I was always very careful about any metrics that I put in place. So I didn't have a lot of them, but whatever ones I did put in place, I found some way to audit the metric to make sure that the metric was absolutely accurate. And if you want a good example, customer delivery. You ask any plant manager what's their customer delivery, pretty typically they'll say 99%. Well, first getting to Honeywell, I asked, that's kind of what I got. And I said, well, I'm going to do a customer survey myself. I want to find out. And uh, the business leaders resisted and said, no, we already know the answer to this. And customers would be complaining if it was a problem, and they don't. Well, I did my own customer survey and found out it was a problem, a serious problem. And customers had either stopped complaining because they got so used to poor performance, or nobody raised it up the chain because nobody listened. And we actually had a abysmal performance. Then I looked at the plants, and all of them were showing 99% customer delivery. So I got into it and started to have some people go in and audit the metric, and found out that plants were excluding anything from the metric they didn't consider their fault. So the order was placed into the system incorrectly. Uh, Order wasn't placed within a lead time. Uh, Something went awry with a supplier. Well, those weren't the fault of the plant. So they showed they were great. So you've got whatever metrics you put in place, you need to make sure you audit them in some way. The third step then is, once you have those metrics, figure out what are the processes that drive that metric, and then process map them. Actually, map the process step by step, which I also go through into the book, and figure out how do you create a much more efficient and effective process using lean thinking that's going to yield improvements in that metric that customers are going to feel. Then I might add a fourth step, and that's, once you get all that stuff done, periodically go back and do that same 50 consumer survey to find out, is what you think happening truly happening.
Right. Absolutely. I want to get to know you a bit also as a leader. I mean, I love all these ideas, these tips on what you just said about really get to the heart of the stats. Don't just accept what your team gives you. Like, go ask yourself and be careful
Yep.
about what metrics you put in place. Before I met you, I had ideas of what you would be like, but they weren't, I wasn't totally right on, like, because I just read your book and I only talked to you on LinkedIn. Just curious, how would you describe your leadership style, David, your personality? What words come to mind?
Hmm. Yeah, you might be better off asking people who'd worked for me, but here's what I'd like to say is that I'm decisive, but very thoughtful in arriving in that decision. Uh, I think most people would say I have a pretty good sense of humor about things and can laugh at myself and other circumstances. Uh, I have a low tolerance and low patience for, let's say, baloney or obfuscation, and much prefer somebody to say, I don't know, rather than just kind of make stuff up on the spot. Um, Gee, I don't know. It's kind of tough to. They might also say on the negative side that I can be defensive about things, and that's one of the things that I've had to control about myself and learn about myself as a leader over time. When, if somebody gives me, let's say, constructive criticism that sounds like "you idiot" at the end, well, I just tend to respond more emotionally than objectively. But that's one of those things I've had to kind of train myself to do. Um, I don't know. It's kind of an uncomfortable question, talking like that, but
I do well with uncomfortable. I like to ask uncomfortable questions. I don't like to be asked uncomfortable questions. But um,
well, the
moving
problem is, of
on.
course, I want to say all these great things about myself, but it's a little uncomfortable.
Well, the numbers don't lie that you did a great job as CEO and, incredible profits and a huge turnaround. Um, one of the things that I've noticed about CEOs and leaders is that they have a lot of stress on their back. I've interviewed CEOs of major companies that have had heart attacks. Curious, how did you balance and manage the stress of working at Honeywell during such a difficult time?
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel that much stress. I've get my I don't take any meds, and my blood pressure is still like around 120 over 70. And I can remember a doctor once saying, "Is there no stress in your life?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm a stress giver, not a stress taker."
Right.
And I, uh, I don't know, for some reason, something will nag at me if I have a problem and I don't have a solution. If I have a problem and I've got a solution that I know is now in place, even though things are still not good, but I know that now it's going to get better, I really stopped working about it. And I've always taken a lot of solace in the serenity prayer, that God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And
Absolutely.
I've always taken a lot of solace in that. And I'm not if you probably guessed, I'm not a religious guy, but I always thought that that resonated pretty well. And I really just, if there's something I can't affect, I just don't think about it. I don't worry about it all that much. I just don't.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's wonderful. So now we're going to do some rapid fire to get to know you a little bit. The first question is one that I don't usually put on the list, but I'm just curious about you. Are you ready to take some questions?
Uh, yeah, I guess we'll find out after we're done, I guess.
Okay. All right. When you were Honeywell CEO, how many hours of sleep a night did you average?
Between 6 and 7.
That's pretty good. What's the most important part of your morning routine?
Probably my coffee and cigar and reading the papers so that I'm up to date on everything.
Tell us a leadership hack that you've used throughout the years.
I was always very honest in answering any question anybody ever asked me, whether my boss liked the answer, his boss's boss liked the answer. Uh, I didn't care. I always kind of viewed it as I didn't want to go through life being afraid of anybody. And I want to respect people. I mean, it doesn't mean treat people with disrespect, but I always thought it was important to just speak your mind. If you're asked, tell the truth about what you truly believe. Don't be a twit about it, but tell the truth. And that's one of the things that I like encouraging in my own people, to the discussion we had before. Um, and I think a second one is if you have the opportunity to do a favor for somebody, even though it's got nothing to do with your job or you don't need the person for anything anywhere else, do it. And I found that just doing that and being nice to people, it's amazing how often that redounded to my benefit in the future. And that wasn't why I had done it. I was just liked them, thought, be a good guy about something, do them a favor. And man, people remember that stuff when they know, especially when they know you don't have to do something for them and you do it anyway. So I would say I always keep that in mind also.
What's your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh, for me, it's seeing my kids do well, and I'm hoping that the grandkids do just as well as they did. And if that happens with the money and the values that I'd like to think that we've been able to pass on, then that'll be a very contented life.
What is one mental health strategy for managing hard days?
Exercise. I always worked out at the end of every day because stress does accumulate during the course of the day. And I found that I didn't get tired as the day went on. I kind of got more and more worked up and energized about things. And just go work out hard for 30 to 60 minutes. And sometimes it was 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. But by the time you go to bed, man, you sleep like a baby. It is the best thing you can do to. I found if I did it in the morning, I was tired all day. So I was
Mhm.
better off working out in the evening.
Mhm. Got it. What's your favorite type of vacation?
Oh, either hunting or fishing.
If you could have lunch with anybody dead or alive, who would it be?
George Washington, I think. He's just he just did such an amazing job as a leader. I mean, not just getting us through the Revolutionary War, but establishing a lot of the precedents that we have as a country. And there was nobody to guide him, nobody for him to turn to, no mentor. He had to figure all this stuff out himself. So, yeah, I'd like to talk to old George. I think he was an impressive guy.
Was there any particular book you read about him where you learned this?
Oh, I've read a bunch of them.
Wow.
I'm an avid reader, and I like history and biographies in particular. So I tend to read a lot of that.
What are you reading right now?
Well, believe it or not, I just finished Stephen Kotkin's uh, first volume on Joseph Stalin's biography.
Wow.
And I could tell you, yeah, just volume one and volume two is equally long, but incredibly fascinating. The tumult, the ambiguity, the mess, the global political mess that they were getting all that done in. Man, it's pretty. I mean, I don't know how those guys managed to make it. I mean, a lot of them got shot. It was just a ridiculous way to live, but painful as it ended up being for all the Russians and continues on today. Uh, they were able to succeed in becoming the leader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And lastly, if you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
Optimistic.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so fun. And I hope you'll come back and join us next year. You'll probably have another book out, and I just can't wait to read it. You're like,
Well, how
maybe
to
not.
be a leader should be out by how to be a leader should be out by then. And yes, you're right. That would timing would be perfect.
I just want you to write a customer experience book. That would just be amazing. Instead, I have to write, I'm writing one and I'm just referencing you like in every chapter. So thank you
Well,
for that.
I mean, there is one story that I wish I thought to relate as we're talking
Tell
about. It was
us.
in the book.
Tell us if you have
It's
time. We still have time.
oh yeah, I got time. This is getting back to going out there yourself. So I went to the Farnborough Air Show to meet aerospace customers because I wanted to get a chance to talk to a number of them. They're all there. And the aerospace guys really didn't want me visiting with their customers because, they control the customer and don't want the CEO mucking it up and being in their business. But I insisted and said, I'm going to be there for 3 days. I just want to meet with customers every day. That's what I want to do. So we're going to this one customer, and of course, they're briefing me as we go along, and they say, "Yeah, they've got this new platform coming," and I'd been all over this aerospace business about their lack of customer responsiveness, to which they told me I didn't know what I was talking about. So we go to this one customer who's got this new platform they're contemplating, and they want me to talk to them about that and see if we can, advance the cause. So I go in, and my first question to every customer anywhere in the world that I go to is, how are we doing with what we already do for you? How do you like us? What do we do well? What don't we? And the CEO looks at me and says, well, I am so glad you dropped by because we expect to file our lawsuit against your company for non-performance on this development contract 2 weeks from now. And we've just about got the paperwork done. And I prefer to tell you in person that we're going to do that.
Ouch.
And I looked at my business leader, the product general manager, and the sales guy, and they were all incredulous. They had no clue that this was the case. So I just started sputtering and saying, I'm sorry, I'll make it right. Give me some time. Let me figure it out before you file. Let me understand this. Let me get into it. I promise you we'll fix this. We'll take care of it. And it was clear that in this business where they all thought everything was going great and they were absolutely clueless
Yeah.
and they had no idea what the customer was thinking. So we did avert the lawsuit, by the way, and
Good.
managed to get the development project going again on track, delivered to the customer spec. But I use that as a great example of why you have to get out there and see it for yourself. Don't just trust what your people say, what reports say. Go out there and validate for yourself. And it's one of the reasons why at Honeywell, I visited a little over 100 countries during my time in the job. And I spent 500 to 600 hours a year on that plane, just running around, meeting with employees, meeting with customers, just to understand what they thought of us. And, could we advance the ball, do better with sales, whatever.
That's amazing. And that's a great story that I'm going to use because what I've heard, even from my own clients who have accounting firms, is that the accountants and consultants don't want to go see the clients anymore because of Zoom, because of COVID. They've gotten really comfortable and they're just not getting out of the office anymore to see clients. And I think your story is a reminder that we can't get too comfortable just because we can.
Uh-huh. Yep, that's exactly right. Zoom does not replace actually going to the customer and having a face-to-face meeting with them to understand how they think about things and how they feel about things. It's just not how humans are. And I said this at the beginning of COVID when I thought the whole work from home thing was one of the more stupid things that I'd ever heard, about how the world had changed. And I kept saying to the businesses I was involved with, you don't overturn 100,000 years of human evolution with a virus and Zoom. You
Yeah.
just don't. It's just not how people are. None of us were developed that way, and it's just not going to happen. And I find it kind of amusing because a lot of CEOs were talking about how the world was different, remote work, and now they're all saying, "Oh no, yeah, we need people back in the office." And you go, "Well, for crying out loud, that was obvious 3 years ago. If you hadn't wanted to be politically correct, that you wanted to make all these avant-garde, seemingly contemporary statements that were baloney then and they're baloney now. People need to be together. It's just how the world is."
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Very well said. Well, David, this has been so fun.
That
I'd love
wasn't
to
too
have
much of a
coffee with you.
diatribe for you, Blake?
I No, this is great. You're a great speaker, and we're so happy that you came on the show. My listeners, I know, are going to go out and buy your book and the short version of your book next year. So hopefully you'll come back, and I just really appreciate you being here with me.
No, happy to do it. It was fun to do. And hopefully, some people out there take it to heart and actually do look at their world a little differently and see what they can do to make their customers' lives better.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you've been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time.